The Buddha walked calmly through the lush forest of Jetavana, his steps gentle and deliberate. A group of distressed disciples approached him, their faces marked by worry. The Buddha stopped and greeted them with a serene smile that calmed their hearts. "Master," one of the disciples said, "we are troubled by the turmoil of our minds and the chaos of life." The Buddha motioned for them to sit beneath a large mango tree whose shade was cool and soothing. He sat cross-legged on the soft earth, inviting the disciples to join him in stillness. The forest around them was alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant bird songs. The Buddha closed his eyes briefly and then opened them, his gaze as clear as a tranquil lake. "Brethren," he began, his voice steady and soothing, "the path to calmness begins with understanding the nature of the breath." The disciples listened intently, their eyes fixed on their teacher, seeking answers to their struggles. The Buddha continued, "Your breath flows naturally, without effort, connecting you to the present moment. Observe it closely, without judgment." He took a deep, deliberate breath, demonstrating the simple act that held profound wisdom within it. Notice how the breath enters your body, how it fills your lungs, and how it departs as effortlessly as it came. The disciples followed his example, closing their eyes and focusing on the sensation of breathing. The Buddha's words were like a gentle stream, guiding them toward inner stillness. "The breath," he said, "is a thread that anchors you to the present, where calmness resides." A young disciple named Rahula raised his hand and asked, "Master, why does observing the breath bring such calmness to our hearts?" The Buddha smiled, his face radiant with compassion. "When the mind is restless," he explained, "it wanders through the past and future, creating storms of worry and regret." He gestured toward the leaves swaying in the gentle breeze. Above them, observe the leaves on the trees. They move with the wind, never resisting nor clinging. The disciples glanced at the leaves, their movements rhythmic and harmonious, and felt a sense of understanding dawn within them. The Buddha continued, "Your breath, like the wind, flows effortlessly. When you align your awareness with it, your mind becomes as serene as the forest." As the disciples practiced focusing on their breath, the Buddha observed them with a quiet smile. Some struggled to maintain their attention, while others found brief moments of stillness. After a while, one of the disciples spoke, his voice hesitant, "Master, my thoughts interrupt my focus on the breath. What should I do when my mind refuses to settle?" The Buddha's expression remained calm, unshaken by the disciples' distress. "Do not fight your thoughts," he advised, "for resistance only fuels their strength. Instead, acknowledge them gently and return to your breath." He picked up a dry leaf from the ground and held it before the group. "Imagine your thoughts as this leaf carried by the stream. Observe them as they pass, without clinging or chasing them." The disciples nodded, their understanding deepening with the clarity of the Buddha's metaphor. They resumed their practice, their breaths steadying as they let go of their struggle. The forest seemed to breathe with them, its sounds harmonizing with their newfound rhythm of calmness. After some time, the Buddha spoke again, his words deliberate and illuminating. "Brethren, the key to calmness lies not in erasing all thoughts but in observing them without attachment." He placed the dry leaf gently back on the ground, letting the wind carry it away. "Like the leaf carried by the wind, let your thoughts come and go, anchored in the awareness of your breath." Rahula, the young disciple, raised another question, his voice filled with curiosity. "Master, how can this practice help us when faced with life's challenges and sorrows?" The Buddha gazed at him with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of the universe. "Brethren," he began, his voice unwavering, "life's challenges are like waves upon the ocean. Some are gentle, while others are fierce." He traced a small circle in the dirt with his finger, symbolizing the cycles of life. "The breath is your anchor, holding you steady amidst the waves. unshaken by their strength or direction. The disciples felt the weight of his words settle within them, giving them a sense of quiet resilience. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden light through the trees of Jetavana. The Buddha observed the changing colors of the landscape with a quiet appreciation. He turned to his disciples and said, "Brethren, the lessons of the breath are all around us, in nature and in ourselves." He gestured to a nearby stream, its waters flowing smoothly over stones and roots. The stream does not resist its path, nor does it cling to the stones it flows around. It simply moves forward. The disciples marveled at the simplicity of the stream's journey, finding inspiration in its effortless motion. The Buddha's voice softened. "In the same way, let your breath guide you, flowing naturally and without resistance." As twilight descended, the disciples felt a sense of peace settle over them, their minds quieter than before. The Buddha's presence and words had planted seeds of calmness within their hearts. He stood and looked at each disciple with profound compassion and understanding. "Brethren," he said, "the practice of mindfulness of the breath, or Anapanasati, is a path to calmness available to all." His words lingered in the cool evening air, resonating with truth and simplicity. The disciples rose and bowed to him, gratitude shining in their eyes for the wisdom he had shared. The Buddha smiled and said, "Remember, calmness is not something you attain. It is something you uncover within." The disciples parted ways to their individual practices, the lessons of the Buddha echoing in their hearts. The forest of Jetavana seemed to hold the energy of their collective stillness, a sacred place touched by timeless wisdom. The Buddha, serene and unwavering, continued his walk through the forest, carrying the light of his teachings wherever he went. Another day, the Buddha walked along the banks of the Neranjara River, the water gliding over smooth stones. Disciples followed him quietly, their minds filled with questions and struggles. The Buddha paused beside a blooming lotus, radiant against the dark waters. He beckoned his disciples closer, his gesture calm and unhurried. "Brethren," the Buddha said, "behold the lotus flower before you, a symbol of purity and resilience." The disciples observed the lotus, its vibrant petals untouched by the muddy waters from which it grew. "This lotus," the Buddha continued, "rises from the mud but remains untainted, its beauty shining despite its origins." A disciple named Ananda stepped forward, his face etched with doubt and curiosity. "Master," Ananda asked, "how can we rise above the suffering and chaos surrounding us, as the lotus does?" The Buddha smiled, his gaze warm yet penetrating, and motioned for Ananda to sit by his side. "Peace," the Buddha said, "is like the lotus. It blooms when we free ourselves from the clinging and aversions of the mind." The disciples sat beside the river, their attention fixed on the lotus and the wisdom shared by the Buddha. The river murmured softly, its sound mingling with the clarity of the Buddha's voice. The Buddha raised his hand and traced the shape of a lotus petal in the air. "Brethren," he said, "recognize that suffering is impermanent, like ripples in the river." He pointed to the surface of the water, where gentle waves moved without resistance to the stones beneath. "Through Vipassana, insight meditation, you will see the true nature of all things and find peace," the Buddha explained. The disciples listened, their hearts stirred by the simplicity and depth of the Buddha's teachings. Ananda closed his eyes and began to meditate, following the Buddha's guidance to look deeply into the nature of his mind. The Buddha observed his disciples with quiet compassion as they meditated, their breathing steady and their faces calm. He turned his attention back to the lotus, plucking it gently and holding it before them. "This flower," he said, "does not resist the mud nor clings to the water. It simply grows and blooms." He handed the lotus to Ananda, who accepted it with reverence, understanding the profound metaphor that lay within. "Brethren," the Buddha continued, Let your mind bloom like the lotus, untainted by the challenges that surround you. Another disciple named Maha Kassapa spoke, his voice filled with longing. Master, Maha Kassapa asked, how can we cultivate this blooming peace amidst the fears and desires of daily life? The Buddha knelt by the river and dipped his hand into the flowing water. His movements smooth and deliberate. Brethren, he began, detachment is the key. Just as the lotus is not bound to the mud, you must release your attachments. The Buddha cupped his hand and let the water drain through his fingers, symbolizing the release of clinging. Peace arises when the mind flows freely, unbound by desires or aversions. The disciples practiced as the Buddha instructed, their hearts quieting as they released their attachments. The Buddha's presence was like the steady river, unwavering and soothing to all who followed him. He stood and gazed at his disciples with profound understanding, seeing their struggles and their potential for awakening. Brethren, he said, peace is not something that is given to you. It is something you uncover within yourselves. His words lingered in the air, their truth undeniable, resonating deeply with each disciple. The Buddha's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the river's flow continued into the distance, unending and serene. Brethren, he said, the lessons of the lotus and the river are infinite, guiding us to freedom and peace. The disciples rose and followed their master, their hearts lighter and their minds quieter than before. The Buddha led them to another bend of the river, where another lotus bloomed in the sunlight. Brethren, he said, observe again the purity of the lotus, blooming anew with each moment of the present. Ananda knelt beside the blooming lotus, his face marked by calm determination to embody the teachings of his master. The Buddha knelt beside him and touched his shoulder gently. Peace, he said, arises when you see clearly, not when you escape or resist. The disciples surrounded the two, their minds attuned to the profound wisdom unfolding before them. The Buddha looked at each disciple and said, brethren, the path of insight is like the river's flow, constant, unwavering, and forever present. The disciples meditated again, this time with their hearts more attuned to the clarity of the Buddha's teachings. The river's sound echoed in their minds, serving as a guide to their inner stillness. The Buddha stood silently, observing the transformation in his disciples, his face serene and radiant with compassion. Brethren, he said, the lotus blooms not for itself but for all who witness its beauty. Peace is not solitary, it is shared. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light upon the water and the lotus flowers, the disciples rose from their meditation. The Buddha stood before them, his posture steady and his gaze unwavering. Brethren, he said, the lotus reminds us that peace blooms where detachment is cultivated and clarity is achieved. The disciples bowed deeply to their master, their hearts filled with gratitude for the wisdom he had shared. The Buddha smiled, his presence a beacon of calmness amidst the ever-changing world. The disciples dispersed to their individual practices, carrying with them the lessons of the lotus and the river. The Buddha walked quietly along the banks, his steps measured and deliberate. As the twilight descended upon the world, the teachings of peace and detachment resonated through the air, timeless and eternal, guiding all who would listen. The Buddha paused again, gazing at the lotus swaying in the breeze, and continued his journey with unwavering calmness. Another day, the Buddha gathered his disciples on the serene mountain slopes of Rajgir as dusk painted the sky. Amber, a small fire burned before them, its flames flickering in rhythm with the gentle evening breeze. The disciples sat close, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the firelight. The Buddha observed the fire for a moment before speaking, his voice calm yet purposeful. Brethren, he began, the fire is a mirror of your mind, revealing its nature through its dance and motion. The disciples leaned in, their hearts eager for the wisdom hidden within the fire's glow. The Buddha continued, when the mind is fed with desires and aversions, it burns fiercely, consuming all in its path. He stirred the fire gently with a stick, the embers rising and falling in response. But when the mind is tended with wisdom and equanimity, it becomes a light that guides rather than destroys. A disciple named Sariputta asked, Master, how can we extinguish the fires of desire and aversion that consume our hearts? The Buddha looked at Sariputta with compassion, his gaze steady and unwavering. Do not fight the fire, for resistance only fuels its strength, the Buddha advised. He held the stick above the flames, allowing the heat to rise without disturbance. Instead, observe the fire with detachment, recognize its impermanent nature, and it will die down on its own. The disciples watched the fire closely, their minds reflecting on the wisdom in the Buddha's words. He continued, Brethren, through the practice of metta, loving kindness meditation, you can transform the fire of craving into the light of compassion. He held his hands together, as if offering warmth and care to the flames themselves. Loving kindness begins with yourself, extending outward to all beings. As the fire shares its light without prejudice. Another disciple named Moggallana spoke, his voice filled with curiosity. Master, Moggallana asked, how can the flame of compassion help us when confronted by anger or hatred in others? The Buddha turned his gaze to the fire, his reflection visible in its flickering glow. Brethren, he said, when faced with anger, respond as the flame does to the wind. It bends, it dances, but it persists. He gestured to the disciples to observe the gentle interplay between the fire and the evening breeze. Compassion does not extinguish the anger of others forcefully. It transforms it gently, with patience and understanding. The disciples practiced meditating as the Buddha instructed, focusing their hearts on kindness, allowing warmth to arise within them. The Buddha rose and added a handful of dried leaves to the fire, watching the flames accept them without resistance. Brethren, he said, the fire is nourished but not consumed by what it receives. It remains steady in its purpose. He turned to Moggallana and said, let compassion be your steady flame, accepting life's challenges without losing your purpose or light. The sun had set fully, leaving the mountain slopes bathed in moonlight. The fire's glow now brighter in the dark. The disciples felt the warmth of the fire, its light a symbol of the resilience and gentleness within their hearts. Sariputta spoke again, his voice steady. Master, can compassion truly transform the suffering in this world? Can its light reach the depths of despair? The Buddha knelt beside the fire, his movements graceful, his presence grounding. Brethren, he said, compassion does not erase suffering, but it lessens its grip, bringing warmth where the cold of despair dwells. He cupped his hands before the fire, as if holding its light and sharing it with the darkness surrounding them. Share your compassion freely, as the fire shares its heat, never seeking reward, only offering what is needed. The disciples sat in silence, absorbing the depth of the Buddha's words as the fire continued its quiet dance. The flames burned steadily, unwavering in their purpose, embodying the lessons the Buddha imparted. He stood and looked at his disciples, his face illuminated both by the fire and his own inner light. Brethren, he said, the fire reminds us that stillness is found not in absence of motion, but in harmony within movement. The disciples meditated deeply, their hearts kindled by the teachings of the Buddha, their minds quieter than before. The mountain air was crisp, filled with the serenity of the night and the warmth of the shared wisdom. The Buddha walked around the fire, observing each disciple, his presence reassuring and guiding. Brethren, he said, let the fire within you burn with compassion and equanimity, illuminating the path for yourselves and others. As the night grew darker, the disciples rose from their meditation, their faces serene and reflective. The Buddha stood before them, his posture steady, his gaze filled with the wisdom of countless teachings. "Brethren," he said, "the flame of inner stillness is not an escape from life, but a guide to navigating it with grace." The disciples bowed deeply to their master, their hearts filled with gratitude for the wisdom he had shared. The fire burned lower, its embers glowing softly as the disciples dispersed to their individual practices. The mountain slopes of Rajgir seemed to hold the energy of their collective stillness, a sacred place touched by timeless truth. The Buddha walked slowly down the path, his steps deliberate. As the night sky stretched endlessly above, the teachings of the fire and compassion lingered in the air, resonating through the minds of those who followed them. The Buddha paused briefly, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames before they faded completely into the darkness. He continued his journey, his presence steady, carrying the light of his teachings wherever he went. "You have given me a path, Master," he said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "I will practice equanimity and compassion together." Thank you for watching. Buddha's teachings are always with you. Subscribe to our channel and we will see you in the next video.